Hey class, it's Ashley and I'm back with another mentoring moment. And today I'm going to share with you the number one strategy in positioning yourself as an expert in interviews. And that strategy is shifting the conversation from an interrogation to a conversation. An interview should be a conversation. An interview should be an opportunity for you to position yourself as a problem solver, as you to position yourself as someone who understands the company, understands the organization, understands the institution, understands what their most pressing issues are, and understands how to articulate how you can solve that organization's problems. But too often, candidates go into interviews positioning it as an interrogation. They let the employer ask them question after question after question after question, and they get really overwhelmed and really frustrated because maybe they weren't prepared for all of those questions, or they didn't have the opportunity to ask their questions, and they get really overwhelmed and really stressed and really nervous, and then they walk away from the interview feeling like, I bombed that, I wasn't able to articulate my skill set, I didn't even get a chance to ask the questions that I wanted to ask, and they often walk away from that interview feeling overwhelmed and frustrated with their experience and with their performance in the interview. Just give me some hearts, like throw some hearts up on the screen if that's ever been your experience. Like you have definitely been in an interview where you felt like, oh my gosh, like I did not present well, I did not articulate my skill set well, I didn't get the answer to ask the questions that I wanted to ask, I don't really feel like I showed up in that interview in an impactful way. Just throw some hearts up on the screen if you've ever had an interview where you had that experience, right? And I think that often for high achieving women, they go into these interviews prepared, right? You tried to do your research, you were doing your Googles, you did some work on LinkedIn, like you were working to be really well researched in these interviews, and then like you kind of feel like, man, I did not say that right, or I forgot this important point, or I didn't tell them about this. You walk away from the interview feeling really frustrated and really overwhelmed and not feeling like you gave it your best or like you articulated your skill set in a meaningful way. But the number one strategy of positioning yourself as an expert in interviews is to shift the interview from an interrogation to a conversation, right? The interview should be a conversation. The interview should be a dialogue between you, an expert in your, functional area, in your area of expertise in your industry, and an employer who's looking to hire an expert in any given area, right? So the problem with interviews today, the problem with traditionally how candidates go into interviews is that they're expecting and they're given an interrogation, right? And you go into the interview and they're like, okay, we have, we're going to ask you a series of questions. And it's like question number 1, question number 2, and question number 3. And you're like, okay, I got my notes over here, but I don't want to read them. And I want to make eye contact. And if I'm sitting in front of them, I want to make sure my skirt ain't rising up and my bra ain't you have so many things going through your head and you're so nervous, and maybe you don't really talk about the things you really wanted to talk about, or maybe you flub over your words, or maybe you say a million times, right? Like you have all these things going on and you get really nervous and you really get frustrated, and then at the end they're like, well, what questions do you have for us? And you're like, what are the next steps? What's the salary? Is this a team environment? Like you're not really asking impactful or thoughtful questions. You just writing down whatever comes to mind. You don't really know like what to ask. And so it becomes this like really overwhelming experience. But one of the things that I teach my mentees in the Mentor Me Accelerator is how to transition the interview from an interrogation to a conversation, right? In the Mentor Me Accelerator, I teach my mentees how to shift it from, oh, you're going to ask me a bunch of questions and I'm going to answer them for you to qualify if I'm a good fit for this organization. And I shift it into, here are the problems that you have in your organization, right? Here are the problems that you've identified on a job posting, on your ad for this position. You identified, here are the problems that my organization has. And then I come in the interview and I share with you demonstrated examples of how I've solved those problems across the course of my career, right? I'm able to articulate how I've solved that problems for company X and company Y and institution B and company C, right? Like I'm able to articulate how I've solved those problems. And then I'm able to ask you, how has your organization solved these problems in the past? What's your general approach to solving these problems? And then I'm able to infuse some of the ways in which I think I can help your organization better solve these problems going forward. And that strategy, right? That strategy that I'm sharing with you right now, and that strategy that I teach my mentees in the accelerator is so powerful because it shifts the conversation from an interrogation of, okay, well, how many times have you done this in the past? And what's your example about this? And when have you done this? And tell us about a time. It shifts it from this interrogation of question after question after question after question to a dialogue that helps remind the organization that they have real problems in their organization and you're in a position to help them solve those problems, and they can have you solve their problems by positioning you as a top candidate and paying you well to solve their problems, right? Because no more, right, do you have the time to go on interview after interview and for them to at the end lowball you and try to offer you $15,000 or $20,000 less than you should be making at this point in your career, right? Like, it's time out for that. No more can you afford to be applying for jobs that, aren't at the level of impact you want to have or at the salary level that you desire. And so that's why it's so important to follow the strategy of shifting an interview from an interrogation, them just asking you question after question, into a conversation where you can answer the questions that they have, but you can also involve them in a dialogue, right? You can also involve them in a dialogue that allows you to be able to ask them questions so you can identify if this is the kind of organization you desire to solve problems for and the type of organization you desire to work for at this point in your career development. So often what I see is that high achieving professional women are going into interviews and they're so nervous and they're so overwhelmed and they're so, frustrated and agitated that they don't really get to speak to their expertise, that they don't really get a chance to talk about what they're good at, that they don't really get a chance to say, this is the skill, the talent, the expertise, the degrees, the credentials that I have, and this is why I'm the best person for the job. They just go in and the people asking them a bunch of questions and they just trying to answer the questions in 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 60 minutes and hope that they tell these people everything that they need to know so that they can get the job, right? And I know for a lot of my mentees before working with me, that's their strategy. I just need to have a winning personality, right? And that's how I get the job. I just need to, say yes to everything and that's how I get the job. But that's not a strategy that works, not in this marketplace, not with the level of competition that's out there in the marketplace, right? Now more than ever, we really need to be positioning ourselves as an expert in the marketplace. We need to be positioning ourselves as an expert, as someone who can solve organizational problems. And we need to be articulating to the employer how we can solve their problems for a certain level of salary, right? We're not solving problems for free. We're not solving problems for $50,000, not at this point in our career. We will command a certain level of salary, right, to ensure that that the employer can see our ability to solve their problems at a higher level and a higher salary range. No longer are we going in hoping and begging and praying and wishing and, just hoping that we get the job, right? That's not what we're doing. Not in this marketplace. These jobs are out here for everybody, honey. These jobs are literally out here for everybody. They're not calling it the Great Resignation for nothing. These employers need high-level professionals to fill these roles. And you're already a high-level professional, but you're not articulating your skill set in an impactful way in the interview. You're letting them interrogate you. You're not making it a conversation. And now you're at a disadvantage in the interview because you let them ask you a million questions, but you didn't get to ask your questions. You didn't get to invite them into a conversation about how you can solve their organizational problems. And now the interview and the conversation is completely one-sided. But the thing that I really want to invite you into is that there's a strategy to position yourself as an expert. And it's shifting the conversation from a straight interrogation and them asking you 10 questions and then leaving you 5 minutes to ask any questions of them, right, to a conversation where you both get to dialogue as you go through the interview. So let me walk you through what that looks like in real time. So let's say, they ask you a question about, tell me about a time when you had to lead a project in your work. Tell me what the project was and what the outcome was, right? This is a common question for high-level roles, mid-level to higher-level roles, director level, associate director level, management roles, right? This is a common thing where they ask you to describe a time where you had to lead a project, tell them what the project was and what the outcome was. So following the strategy that I posted in my feed post today, following that strategy, you can walk through those 7 steps, right? You can walk through those exact 7 steps and speak exactly to how to answer that question. But to shift it from just you answering a flat question and then shifting it into a conversation, from you shifting it from an interrogation to a conversation, what you want to do is after you answer their question, then you want to say, can you share a bit about, how many, collaborative projects would I expect in this role, over the course of a year, right? Like, do you all see me, working on projects, with different stakeholders across the organization throughout the year? Or is there a high project onboarding time where I focus on a lot of, project-led work and then work individually as I go through the role, right? As I go through, my year in the role, right? So that allows you not to just answer questions and be like, okay, done. Next question, right? It shifts it from an interrogation to you having a conversation. Of course, you're going to answer their questions, right? Of course, you're going to speak to them about your skill set. Of course, you're going to talk to them about the outcomes of your work and the sustainability of the projects that you work on. But you're also going to ask them a question, right? So once you answer that question, you say, and I'm so glad you asked about that because I really enjoy working on projects. And one of the things that the job description left me wondering is how many project-led opportunities will I have in this role, right? And is my role primarily project manager, or am I sort of doing operation support for project managers, or whatever the scenario is? But it allows you to shift it from an interrogation, them asking you question after question after question, to you engaging in a dialogue. And honestly, it doesn't really matter what they say. It doesn't really matter what they say to your question or your follow-up. But the power, right? The power is that now it's a conversation. They ask you a question, you ask them a question. So instead of waiting till the end and hoping they give you 2 to 3 minutes to ask your questions, you're engaging in a dialogue along the way. I want you to shift these conversations. I want you to shift these interviews from an interrogation to a conversation. I want you to have a strategy when you interview. I want y'all to start taking notes in these interviews, right? And I want you, don't read off the paper, but feel comfortable to refer to your notes. After they ask you a question, pause. And there's so much power in the silence and the pause. I teach that to my mentees. And then answer their question and then follow up with the question. Follow up with an iteration. Follow up with something that allows them to see you as an expert. You're not just there to answer questions that say yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. You're there to engage them in a dialogue and to position yourself as a high level problem solver. Right? I am so thrilled to have this conversation with you and to really help you think more strategically about these interviews. Honey, these jobs are out here for everybody. And no longer are we just going into interviews and just hoping and praying and begging them to take us. We are going into these interviews saying there are so many opportunities for me to have impact on the world. Your organization seems to have a problem that I would be interested in solving. Let me see if I want to work for your organization. That is what the interview is for. Nothing less. Right? It's for that. It's for a two-way street. It's for a two-way dialogue. The interview is an opportunity for you to learn more about their organization and what their pressing issues are, and for you to decide if you want to solve their problems based on how they answer your questions. Right? It's not just an interrogation for them to ask you a million questions and for them to leave you 5 minutes to ask questions of them. It's an opportunity for a dialogue. And the way you shift into that dialogue is that you follow up with questions as they ask you questions. You ask for clarification. You ask them what that looks like in their organization. You ask them how often they do that in their organization. You ask them when the last time they did that, right? You ask them follow-up questions so that it encourages a dialogue. And as you speak to that, you're able to speak to your ability to solve problems in organizations. And that's what every single employer is looking for. This interview is an opportunity for you to get to know their organization, just like it's an opportunity for them to get to know you. No longer can we go in interviews and just answer questions. Yes, no, maybe, so. We can't do that. And then they leave us 5 minutes to ask questions of us. No, we need to interrupt the cycle and invite questions of them as we're going. That is the number one strategy to position yourself as an expert. And any organization that won't allow you to do that, any organization that's like, oh, well, you can ask questions to the end. That's like, if you value flexibility and autonomy and creativity and innovation, right? If any of those align with your values, that's probably not an organization you want to work for, because they're not even interested in innovation in the interview. They're not even interested in a dialogue in the interview. If they're not going to listen to you when you're a candidate, are they going to listen to you when you're an employee? Probably not. So that's probably not an organization you want to work for. You want to make sure that you're interviewing them just like they're interviewing you. And I know a lot of people say that, right? Like they say that, but now I'm teaching you strategy on how to do it. I'm not just telling you to do something and go off. I'm teaching you strategy how to do it, so that no longer are you in a position where you're begging and pleading for somebody to give you a job, but that you're positioned, right? That you're positioned as someone who they're excited to work with because they were able to have a conversation with, not just an interrogation. Shift interviews from an interrogation to a conversation. That is the number one strategy for positioning yourself as an expert in these interviews. I am so excited to teach you more strategy about interviews in the Mentor Me Accelerator. Now is the time to apply to the accelerator. Go to my website at mentor-me.org. That's mentor-me.org to apply to the accelerator today. I want to get on the phone with you. I want to learn more about your career development, and I want to understand what's going on in your career right now. What's impacting your ability to be successful in your work, and how can I best support you as a mentor to make sure we can take immediate action on helping you make more money and have more impact in your career. There is so much more strategy that's available to you in the accelerator, and I'm so excited to serve as your mentor and help you advance your career in the ways that you desire. DM me, right? Shoot me a DM if you have any questions about the accelerator. If there's anything I can clarify, I want to make sure you get all your questions answered so that we can get you the help you need to make more money and have more impact in your career. Thanks so much for watching today's live. Talk soon. Bye.